Miss Mary Spencer Veazey, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful to connect with you. So excited to hear more about your story. And it's always good to have a female guest on the show for our female listeners. So thank you
You
so
for
much for
having
joining
me.
us.
Yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
excited to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here on the podcast, our goal and our mission has been to emphasize how God is always in the space of making us more like Him, whether that's through hardship or suffering, win, loss, good, bad. God is always in the business of making us more like Jesus. And with that comes our own stories of, everything that we go through. God is always using these things to further impact the person we become. Mary Spencer, I'd love to give you a space here up front to share your story, how you have become the female, the woman you are today, doing things all over the country for young adults. I really just open up the space for you. What has God done in your life, and how has He used these things to further impact the person that you've become?
Yeah, so I'll start from kind of the beginning. So I grew up in South Georgia, small town, had a big family in South Georgia,
Okay.
and grew up in the church. Knew Jesus from a really young age, loved Him from a really young age, became a believer about 5 or 6, and grew up going to church, was involved in everything under the sun at church, but it always kind of felt like a checklist, like I needed to earn God's love.
Yep.
I didn't quite understand the concept of how it came freely to me. And then as I went on into middle school and high school, kind of struggled with friendships, couldn't figure out where I fit in, and didn't really feel like I belonged. And I thought, okay, when I go to college, this is going to solve all my problems. I'm going to find my people.
Yep.
I'm going to be cool. I'm going to be the person that I've always wanted to be. And I thought I was going to go to the University of Georgia. I got in and I went and toured, and I was like, I don't think this is where God has me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of like a cardinal sin to get into UGA and not go if you're from Georgia.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to keep looking around, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to go there. And I was a big rule follower in high school, and we had a senior skip day. And I didn't want to look like I was going to school and be in a goody two shoes. So I was like, I'm just going to go on a college visit and see what another college is like, and not be at school, but also not have an unexcused absence because I was so worried about that.
Right.
So I went and toured Auburn with my parents, and I didn't know anybody at Auburn. I didn't know anything about Auburn, different state. No one from my hometown really went to Auburn. And I got there and walked around campus and did the tour. And while we're in the middle of the tour, I looked at my parents and I was like, I think this is where I'm going to go next year. And they were like, really? Well, why? And
Yeah.
I just had this peace about the place. And I felt like the Lord was like, this is where you need to be. And I couldn't really explain it, but I got to school the next day and I was like, I'm headed to Auburn. And everyone was like, what are you doing? So I was excited because I grew up in a high school where I graduated with 55 kids. So I was like, I can't wait to get into a bigger space, have a lot more options of friends, a lot of people I grew up with, but 12 years of all the same people, sometimes you're ready for something new.
Yeah. Yep.
So I get to Auburn and I don't really know how to make friends because I've grown up with the same 55 kids. So I'm like, okay, how do I do that? And I was in a relationship with a guy from high school. It ends my first month in college. I went through sorority recruitment, got dropped from every sorority except for one. And I was kind of like, God, I thought that you said I was supposed to be here, and why are you making this so difficult for me? And I remember sitting in my car and praying with the Lord and being like, okay, you say that you give joy to your people. I don't feel that, but I want to experience that, and I really want to surrender everything to you and love you and know you more. If you will just help me figure this whole thing out, like, please just be with me in this moment. And I felt such a peace wash over me. And it's not like everything changed the next day, but I felt like the Lord was really with me in my college experience. So I got involved in things. I had to learn how to make friends. I tell this story in my book about how I would invite a stranger to lunch every week, trying to make friends because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And all these girls from Birmingham have tons of friends and I don't. So
Yeah.
trying to make friends, had an awesome experience at Auburn, got involved in a church, and it was just incredible. And then I graduated from Auburn and decided to start over again in a new city where I knew no one. I don't know why I keep doing that. I'm really working on that, not doing that again, because it's just so hard to start over. So I get to Nashville, I get my MBA at Belmont, and then the pandemic happens. And I'm like, okay, here I am in a strange city. I don't know anyone, and now I need a job, and everything's closed down. So I got a job at a nonprofit that I was volunteering with. And I thought I would be there for a few months once the pandemic kind of settled down, because I was like, working for a nonprofit, I'm going to make no money. And that's not what I got my MBA for. So I got there and I fell in love with it. It was an addiction treatment center for women. The first year that I was there, we saw 100 women come to Christ. It was just unbelievable work that they're doing there. And my boss was like, you're going to work for nonprofits forever. And I was like, I'm kind of worried that you're right. So
Uh-oh.
I just fell in love with the nonprofit work. And now I work for a nonprofit in town that does kids counseling ministry. But I just have seen the Lord's hand so much in nonprofit work and have just so enjoyed being a part of that and feel called to it. And there are a lot of times where it's be easier just to go and have a corporate job and make more money and have the things that I thought I was going to have when I got my MBA. But I just feel so filled up being a part of this nonprofit work. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, so good. What part of South Georgia are you from?
Tifton.
Okay, my mom's side is from Columbus.
Oh, no way. Yeah, I
Yeah.
drove through Columbus to get to Auburn. So, yeah.
Small world,
that's
man.
awesome.
I love
Yeah,
it. Well,
that
your
is.
story is very similar to mine. I was originally
Yeah.
going to go to the University of Maryland for baseball.
Okay.
Something felt weird, kind of similar to yours, just off,
Yeah.
right? And then all of a sudden landed at Liberty University. And I mean,
Right.
even sitting here today, there's that thought always of like, man, if I was back there, all my
Right.
friends were there, I'm comfortable there. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, so that's like close to home. Everything that's easy in my life is right there. But then, like you said, when you kind of make these decisions to kind of go off the rails a little bit, it seems like a lot of more joy and fulfillment is found in the things where God is calling you to elsewhere. I love that. And I think as you go through your story, even with my own story, I think about like, man, there's a lot of things that have happened that have really shaped who I've become and the person that I am today. As you look back at your story, Mary Spencer, what would you say is like a big defining moment in your life? What has God done to prune your heart and make you specifically into the woman you are today? What would you say that is?
Yeah, so this is pretty fresh on the mind. We at work did an Enneagram training on Wednesday. I don't know if you know much about the Enneagram.
Yep,
I feel
absolutely.
like it was really, it was such a big hot topic in the Christian world for a while, but it's kind of died out a little bit. But we did this Enneagram training on Wednesday, and I'm an 8, and 8s love control, and 8s don't want to be controlled. We fear being controlled. And I've always known that since I was a little kid. I didn't really know anything about the Enneagram until I got to college, but that has been something the Lord's had to really work in my heart, is to let go of control, because I want to manipulate every situation, every friendship, every relationship to be what I want it to be and not what the Lord has it to be, or just to let it flow naturally. And so that's something that I've had to really work on. And that was tough for me in college because I wanted to prove myself to everybody else. And the Lord was like, you really don't have to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah.
It was still that moment of, I'm trying to earn everybody's love. I'm trying to earn God's love too. But recently in my 20s, this has been probably 2 years ago, I went through a really hard season, a really dark season, where I was like, you know what, Lord, I know that you're true and I know that you're good, but I don't feel that, and I don't see the light at the end of this tunnel. I had a lot of really hard things happen. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. I had a really hard time at my job. I was living in a house in Nashville where people tried to break in weekly, and was having nightmares and couldn't sleep through the night for over a year, and some other tragedies that happened. And it just kind of felt like everything was happening at once, and I couldn't quite figure out why the Lord was letting this happen. And there wasn't a moment where I was like, okay, today I'm better. Things are all good. We're healed from this. But that was the first point in my life where I've had something really, really hard happen, where I thought, okay, God, I trust who you are, and I'm going to keep walking with you day by day and take this one step at a time. And that's a big phrase in recovery. I was working at an addiction treatment center at the time, and they always say one day at a time. I'm like, okay, I'm actually going to live that out in my own life. I'm going to take it one day at a time and trust who you are and relinquish control. And I thought my 20s would look different than they've been. I thought I'd be married with kids. Didn't know if I'd still be in Nashville or not. And I'm so glad now on the other side of that none of that's happened, because I've gotten to live out my life for the Lord in such a fuller way than I think I would have experienced if I had gotten everything that I wanted. Sure. So, yeah, I think control has been the hardest and also the most rewarding thing to let go of for me with the Lord. So, yeah.
I love it. And we're going to get into this a lot more later on, but I want to ask you this up front, because I'm very curious, because I think, myself included, a lot of our listeners are in this season of, it feels like there's just a lot going on, a lot of unanswered questions, kind of similar to what you're saying of like, man, I'm just walking through the season where like, I know the Lord is good. I've seen it time and time again in my life. I see it in the scripture, but honestly, like physically right in front of me, I don't really see it right now. Yeah. And for you, I mean, you said yourself, you're on the other side of that today. Yeah. But as a listener, like, what do you do in those seasons where you're walking through that? Like, what do you do to get through those with courage, with strength, and to really trust and believe that God is really who he says he is?
Yeah, it's so important, I think, to have community that just rallies around you. That was really important for me, because my natural tendency was to be like, okay, a lot of hard things are going on and I don't want to burden everybody else, so I'm just going to isolate. Yeah. I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to talk to people. I'm not going to get my friends involved in this, because A lot of my friends speak a lot of wisdom, and sometimes wisdom hurts and is hard to hear. And I was like, I don't know if I want that. But once I got my community involved and was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I can get through this. Like, I don't know where the light is at the end of this tunnel. Help me see that. And them rallying around me, you know, inviting me to lunches, to dinners, to taking me to church, taking me to small group. I think that's the most important part of all of it, because the Lord wants us to be playing in a community. He's created this for us. He wants us to be a part of that. And it's easy to be like, okay, I'm just going to scroll on TikTok and just wait till it's time to go to bed and then be done with the day and then start over again, you know? Yeah. So I would say that was the key for me, is finding a really strong community. And some of this is going on right as kind of we were re-entering the world post the pandemic. So it was hard because we had been isolated for so long. And I had to really fight to make friends again. And it's hard making friends. Like, it is really, really hard making friends as an adult. And I was not prepared for that. But getting plugged into a local church, I think, is a really key point too. I kind of had found a church right before the pandemic happened. And then we went online. And then when the world kind of reopened, I was like, okay, I've got different values than I thought I did. I want something a little bit smaller. I want people to know if I don't show up to church. Like, I want people to be really involved in my life at church. So did a little church hopping, found the right church, and I've gotten really plugged in. And I think if I wasn't plugged in, it would be a lot harder in a moment like that, because that's been kind of my anchor. Those people have been kind of my anchor, and learning about the Lord weekly in person has been such an anchor for me too.
Yeah, I love it. I've heard it said isolation is the enemy's playground, right?
100%.
And personally, I just had a conversation last night with a friend. It's like, man, I need that. You need you need times like that where it puts you in check, and I think it's so important. You are a young adult, Mary Spencer. You understand the difficulties of this season, and I think there is a temptation for all of us where we start to think, man, once I arrive at blank, then I'll be happy. Once I have this, once I attain that, then I could actually live the life that I want to live, quote unquote, right? Yeah. Why is this such a danger? Why is this such a deceiving thing for us to believe? And how does that affect the way that we live today?
Yeah, I think especially in the Christian world, the temptation is, okay, if I'm not married by X age, I'm a failure. Or if I don't have the right job, I'm a failure. And I've seen that lived out in my life. I've seen that lived out in a lot of friends' lives of, okay, I got the dream job. It looks super glamorous. I'm miserable every single day at work. Or I got married really young. I married the wrong person. Things are really hard. There's been infidelity. What do I do? And I could have waited to get married later, but the pressure to get married so young is crazy in the Christian world. So I've struggled with that myself of like, okay, once I hit the next goal, I'm going to be happy. Once I write the book, I'm going to be so happy. Like, that's such an accomplishment. And then it happens and you're like, oh, it's just another day. Okay. What was I doing that for? So I think it's really important to go, okay, something I talk about a lot in the book is I struggled for a long time to put God on the pedestal of my life. So relationships, friendships, Auburn, all these things were on the pedestal of my life. And until I got the Lord on the pedestal of my life, everything was just chaos. Nothing really mattered because the Lord wasn't my priority. So I would say until you have the Lord on the pedestal of your life, you will never feel satisfied. You will never feel like anything's enough, because the world is feeding you all this information of, oh, once you do this, you're going to be happy. You're going to have the joy that you seek. And it's never enough. I've lived it out. I've had, I've gotten a book deal. I've published a book. I've had a relationship, I've had all the things, and none of it's ever satisfied.
So good. And I'll say this too. I've said this time and time again on the podcast, because I think, and this is no, false humility for either of us, but I think it's so easy to look, it's, like they have the books. I've read a couple of books myself, podcasts, like you get to, it's like, oh, they've definitely made it in life. Like they have everything they've ever wanted. And you wake up the next day and it's like, you don't feel any more important because of these things, like there's nothing about your life that adds significance when you attain more things, and I think that's the lie that we believe. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I feel like there's this point where we feel like once I get there, then I've made it in life. And like, my question is just like, is there ever a point where you actually make it? Like, what does that even mean? What if the Christian life is like surrender and trust every single day,
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think there's a point where that we ever make it. Yeah. I mean, I think we make it when we arrive to heaven and we're with the Lord for eternity. But yeah, it's a struggle, because you look around and you're like, on Instagram, I'll see a friend. It's got the happy family, kids, the perfect life. And then I'll talk to them and they're like, oh, I'm miserable. These things are happening. Work's hard, and you don't see that because no one's going to post their hard, bad moments on Instagram or social media. But yeah, I don't think there's a moment that you ever make it. I feel like the happiest, most joyful people I know don't care about worldly things, don't care about, if they write a book, great, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Or if they get married, that's awesome. That is not, the everything in their world. So yeah, I don't think we ever make it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I want to ask you about your book. I know this is a big idea, hot topic, what we're talking about. It's called Cul-de-sac Crossroads, Navigating Life's Twists and Turns in Your Twenties with Courageous Clarity. Mary Spencer, why did you write this book? What are you hoping readers will gain from this resource? And honestly, kind of a twofold question. Why do you think this season of life, your 20s, is such a difficult time?
Yeah. So I started writing the book accidentally in college. I wrote on a blog starting probably when I was 18, and would write down these stories about things that would happen in college. And then right when I was about to graduate from college, I was like, okay, we're all about to do something different. For a while, our whole lives really, we've all just done school, and now we're about to graduate, and I've got friends that are getting married, and I've got friends that are moving to New York City to be fashion designers. I've got friends going all over the world doing different things. And nobody really gives us a roadmap for that. And as a person that loves control, I would love to have a roadmap for that. I would love to know I'm checking the boxes.
Yeah.
And I would talk to my friends about this. And originally the book was going to be called 22 and Not a Clue, because I was like, I'm about to graduate. I don't know what's going on. What do I do? But as I have gotten older in my 20s, I have gotten a little bit more of a clue. But I would write down these different stories about making friends, or having the Lord on the pedestal of my life, or finding a church. And when I got to Nashville, a lot of that became more evident. And I've seen a lot in my friends and in myself that I don't know who I am without knowing whose I am. So until we kind of get that straight, we can't really know who we are and what the Lord created us to do and to be.
Yeah.
So the first section of my book is all about who you are in the Lord, finding the right church, finding mentors, prayer, all these different topics surround the Lord. And then the second section is all about who you are. So what are you doing every day? Friendships, relationships, your careers, all the different things, but also like finding joy in your everyday, discovering delight. And I think this season is the hardest for people in their lives this decade, because everybody's doing something different, and there's not a right or wrong answer. It's not the right or wrong answer to get married in your 20s. It's not right or wrong answer to have an awesome career, making tons of money. And I feel like it's hard to measure where you are and feel like you're an equal to people in your 20s. And you're never going to feel like you're an equal, because everyone's in different seasons. Yeah. I've got friends that have a couple kids, and I've got friends that are just living their best single lives. So yeah, I think this season's just tough because you don't really have a way to measure if you're doing enough, quote unquote. And we've kind of measured ourselves against people our entire lives in school. So yeah, I think that's hard.
So good. I think comparison is the enemy of the entire time in this 20s, right? Because like 100%. What you're saying, you're just constantly looking out on everybody else, left to the right, trying to feel like if you're measuring up to them on their standards. I was actually talking with somebody a couple of months ago about this idea. We're just like, why is this so hard for 20s? You know, why is it such a difficult season? And it seems like, for us at least, you tell me your thoughts, I think we like to have a sense of stability to where we know exactly what tomorrow's going to look like, you know? And so but like we've been saying, I think the lie is you think, okay, once I'm married, once I have the job, like I know exactly what tomorrow's going to hold. I'm going to wake up to my husband or wife, my kids. I'm going to go to this job from 9 to 5. Like I know exactly what I'm going to do. And maybe we don't like the thought of uncertainty. Would you say?
Oh, yeah, I would absolutely agree. I don't like uncertainty at all. I want to know, I'm a planner. Like I want every single detail of my life laid out. And that's something that's been different this past, I would say, 6 months, is after the book came out, I was like, okay, what's next? And I kind of felt this tug on my heart of the Lord being like, nothing. Just take a deep breath, relax, enjoy your friendships, enjoy your, like, just take a deep breath. You don't have to constantly be achieving things. And that's been really hard for me because I want to know what's next. I want to know what I'm about to do, what's about to happen, and when it's about to happen. And I have been thinking about going to seminary, and I got in back in the fall for a program that would start in January. And I want things to be done as fast as they can. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start in January. I'm going to knock it out. And I felt the Lord being like, no, you're not. Don't do that. Just enjoy your life where I have you. And you don't have to always have your schedule filled to the brim. And that's been hard because I want to plan everything out, and nothing's planned right now. I've got no book planned next. I've got nothing big planned in my life next. So I think we want to know it's just human nature to want to know what's going to happen next. We want to have that kind of control and that certainty, and we want to know when we're going to get married. And I think especially as girls, we're always like, okay, by 25 I'm going to be married, 28 I'm going to have a kid, 30 the next kid. We've got it all planned out. And then when that doesn't pan out, we're like, okay, I'm just going to bump it up a couple years. And I just had to go, okay, I have no idea what's going to happen in my life. And I feel really okay with that for the first time in a really long time. And it's so nice to be like, okay, God, you got it. But that took a long time to get there.
Yeah, I can relate to you in that instance because I played baseball in college, so former athlete. And there's a part of me ingrained where it's like, I just want to accomplish and complete everything, like as fast as I can, right? I have the same thing. I think a lot of the young adults, listeners, have that same struggle.
Yeah.
And so here's my question to you. As someone who has done these things and now on the other side of it, is it necessarily wrong to want to do these things? Is it wrong to want to accomplish things, get things done quickly? Because I think a lot of times you get slapped for the glory of God on the back of it, and you start thinking like, man, this is great. It's a great thing. So how do you navigate whether or not this has become something you worship maybe, or something that you simply desire to do for the glory of God?
Yeah, I think a lot about, okay, what do I think about right when I'm about to fall asleep and when I wake up? What's my first thought? Is it about the book? Is it about a relationship? It is about friendships. I think what we think about the most is what we are putting on the pedestal of our lives. And so I don't think it's bad to want things. I don't think it's bad to want to achieve things. I think there's a lot of good in that. But when we place that as an idol versus just a part of our lives is when it gets kind of tricky. And it's hard because we want to look like we're doing a lot to the people around us. And a lot of times the Lord's just calling us to be with him. Something that I really struggle with is rest and Sabbath. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people in their 20s struggle with, and just in general in this culture struggle with. And so I'm trying to work on, okay, in my spirit, with the Holy Spirit, do I feel a tug on my heart to do this or to not do this? Do I feel peace about this? And if I feel this kind of nudge of like, no, you need to take a step back from all this, like you're making this an idol, I really try to lean into that because I trust the Holy Spirit's guiding in that. But it's hard. I want to achieve more.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. As we kind of think about these young adult years, it seems like a lot of times it's kind of a mixture of two things. It's like the waiting on one side, but then there's also this other side of like cultivating, where you're kind of doing both, right? You're kind of trying to wait patiently for God's promise, God's gift, his blessing for you. But then on the other side too, it's like, I'm going to knock on some doors at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
I've heard it says like, you knock on doors, you don't open them. You know, it's kind of this mixture of in between. Is this the right way to view our 20s? Mary Spencer, like, how do we go about this season, and what should we be doing in these young adult years? How do we approach these years faithfully?
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important is, yes, waiting, but actively waiting. So I think cultivating goes into that a lot, right? So something that I've kind of struggled with in my 20s until recently is, okay, my time has not always got to be my own. I don't need to always spend all my time thinking about me. I need to give back. So I've started volunteering with the youth group at my church, and it's just changed my life. Like, I feel so much more filled up giving back and being a part of what God's calling me to, and not constantly always thinking about myself. I think we have a tendency to be self-centered and put ourselves at the center of our lives, and God's not calling us to do that. He wants us to be invested in our community. Something that we talk a lot about in my book is time, talent, and treasure. Okay, how are you giving back all of those three things to the people around you? And something that I've really been trying to work on with my friends right now is when something hard's happened in a friend's life, or when a miscarriage happens or something horrific happens in a friend's life, not just saying, hey, how can I be there for you? Showing up and being there, like bringing a pot of soup to their house, or taking their kids and going and run errands for the day. I think we want to be so kind, especially in the South, of like, I want to be there for you. What can I do? Just show up. Just go ahead and show up. Don't ask how you can show up. Just show up and be there for them. But yeah, it's hard in this waiting season, but everybody's waiting for something. You know, you get married and you're waiting to have the kid. You get the kid, you're waiting for them to get into school. There's just always something that we're waiting for next. So I think, especially if you're single and in your 20s, don't waste this time. You have I hate when people say that people in their 20s have a lot of free time. You don't have tons of free time. Your time just looks different than everybody else's. Like, my life is really full and I'm really busy. I don't have tons of free time, but I want to make sure I have pockets of time where I'm spending really investing in the next generation and also being invested in. So having mentors in my life, being involved in my local church, giving back, being a part of something bigger than myself.
Yeah, so good. I think how you wait is more important than how long you wait. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we live in such a self-centered generation, you know, where it's like, I mean, even the example you just brought up, I know myself, and I'm talking about myself, I'll put myself on the pedestal right now. My first thought is like, man, I would never do that. Like, I'm too cool for that, you know? But
Yeah.
it's like, that's the world we live in, where we think that there are things that God has put in front of us to be faithful to
Yeah.
that we don't want to do because it's not our preference, right? And I think the problem is we think when we get to heaven, it's going to be all about, okay, like when you're measured by faithfulness, it's all about like how much. Like when you see all these people, it's like all these leaders, Christian speakers, all these people, it's like, okay, how much have they done? And that's what they're measured by. But what if the reality is we're being measured by how well we steward what we have, good or small, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that changes everything about a perspective, really, because it's not, at that point, the cliche is like it's quality over quantity. You know, it's like
100%.
how you steward what you have more so than what you have specifically, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think I look at, especially at Bob Goff. I don't know if you follow him at all, but he's just one of my favorite Christian authors. And he's not out here trying to do the craziest, flashiest things, but he's always living in such a courageous way and going to Uganda and being with kids, or he has his office hours at Disneyland. Like, he's just a funny guy, but he is not wasting his time. He is spreading the gospel, but in such a relatable way. I think it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen this at all after college, but I've seen a lot of friends walk away from their faith post-college, and I thought it would be more friends after high school than post-college. But I think a lot of people have Christianity misconstrued, and it's just interesting to watch them compare the Christianity that they think they know to what I know to be true from the Bible. And so trying to steward relationships with non-believers and believers in this time, I think, is really interesting too. But yeah, to your point, I think that we really have to be diligent of, okay, I'm going to steward my time well. And that doesn't always look like an abundance of things. If you're involved with one ministry and you're volunteering with that ministry, be all in. I feel like we spread ourselves too thin. And so we've got to find ways to go, okay, I've got to cut back on things. I'm the kind of person that wants to be involved in everything. And last year I resigned from every single board that I was on, a lot of different organizations. I said, I have to take a step back. I want to be all in at my local church, volunteering with this one ministry. And I work for a nonprofit, so it's just too much. And that was hard for me to do because I want to be a part of everything. But I think it's important to go, okay, just be a part of a few things. And you know what you don't have to do? Post it all over social media. You can just be all in, and nobody has to even know. And that's hard for me to do too, because it's not even that I want everybody to think I'm this great person, but I love what I'm doing so much. But sometimes the Lord's like, you know what? Nobody actually has to know.
Amen to that. I think busyness often is equated to importance.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the
100%.
case, right? Maybe that's not the case. You mentioned the word courage, and I know that's something that you talk about a lot in your book. I think one of the challenges for young adults is we start to believe that because I don't know what to do, because I don't know what happens next, I don't know who I am, right? So we start to lose the sense of identity because it's like, what am I supposed to do? And when I don't know what to do, I really don't know how to identify myself because I don't know what I'm actually doing in this world.
Yep.
How do we approach this season of life, Mary Spencer, with courage? What does that courage come from? Where does it come from? And how do we cultivate this trait in and through our lives every single day?
Yeah, I think courage is just stepping out in faith. So I'm definitely an extrovert. So people are like, this is easy for you. It's not. Courage can look like being in a coffee shop and kind of feeling a nudge to talk to the person next to you. Courage can look like, okay, I really want to go and get plugged into church, but I don't know anybody. Am I going to show up by myself to church? That feels weird. And it's not. But it's hard. It's hard to show up alone. It's hard to do things alone, but we have to put ourselves out there to get to the highest calling that the Lord has on our lives. And even for extroverts, it's hard to put yourself out there, but I would encourage people in your everyday life, find little moments of courage, asking a friend to lunch that you haven't seen in forever or would want to get to know better. Getting plugged in a small group where you know nobody and showing up alone feels scary. Yeah. But once you get there, it feels so different. It's like when we go to the dentist. We're so dreading going to the dentist. We get to the dentist and we're like, oh, that really wasn't that bad. And it took 30 minutes. Like, it's not that deep. Yeah. So I would encourage people to go ahead and put yourself out there, because when you show up, you're fine. It's the waiting of getting there that you're like, ugh, I don't think I can do this. But the Lord calls us to courage. The Lord wants us to be courageous in our lives. And he was such a courageous person. Jesus was such a courageous person. He was out there talking to the loneliest, most difficult people that you could find on the streets. Be out there and be that person. Something that I learned at my last job, I was surrounded by a lot of women that were homeless. And when I would pass homeless people on the street before, I would kind of avoid eye contact and not look at them because I was scared of them. And when I met these women in real life that had been homeless for decades, I was like, they are just ordinary people. So courage can even look like talking to somebody that would not be the person you would normally talk to. I'll never forget, I was at a Starbucks that was across the street from my last job. And this guy was homeless and he would stand on the side of the street every day and would have a sign trying to get some money. And I would talk to him when I would pass him and say hello. And one day I said, you know what? I don't think I've ever asked you your name. What's your name? And he told me his name. And then he immediately pulled me into a hug and was like, nobody's asked me that in years. So just be courageous in everyday little moments like that. Just put yourself out there and see what happens, because the greatest joy is on the other side of courage.
I love it. Jesus was super courageous, as you said. That's such a good word and powerful reminder for all of us. Mary Spencer, as we wrap up here today, typically here on the show, I ask the guests to share something personal, something that God is doing in and through their life today to shape and prune the person that they become. If there's something, a last pressing word for our listeners, what is God doing in your life right now? How can we be praying for you? What would you encourage our listeners with?
Yeah. I would say right now I'm in an interesting season that I haven't been in before. I came out of a pretty hard, dark season, and I'm in a real season of contentment. And I wouldn't say that I've ever had a season of contentment before. And I don't have everything that I want, but I feel so satisfied in what the Lord has given me. And so that's been really interesting for me in the Lord, because my deepest relationship with him has been when I've been in a really dark season, because that's all I've had to cling to. But right now we're in a really sweet season of like, okay, I really love getting to know the Lord every day, and I'm not desperate, but I want to know him better. Ways you can be praying for me. Honestly, my job is amazing. I work with kids every day. And I work with kids at youth group on Sundays. And so I'm with kids a lot. So just praying for the conversations that I have with those kids every week. It's really interesting right now how much knowledge kids have about the Lord and what they're hearing at school from their friends, and how vocal people are about their beliefs and their unbeliefs. So that's something that's been really on my heart, is just sharing with kids about the gospel.
I love it. Thank you so much for hopping on with us today, Mary Spencer. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you, pick up your book, all those kind of things?
Yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere on the internet. It's Spencer Veazey. It was my childhood nickname. That's my username. I'm on Substack. My book's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere places books are sold. So feel free to reach out. Would love to talk.
Awesome. I would encourage all of our listeners to check out everything that Mary Spencer is doing across the country to impact young adults. Thank you so much for joining us again, my friend. Can't wait to see how God continues to use you to impact lives around the country.
Thanks, Ryan.